think the two most effective ways of identifying trends are using moving averages and also the analysis of individual daily or periodic bars. So we can identify short-term uptrends and downtrends, and therefore identify peaks and troughs, and therefore medium-term uptrends and downtrends. Now, to start off with, here in the top left-hand corner, we have what I refer to as a short-term uptrend, and we can call it that because we've had two successive periods where the low has been higher and also the high has been higher. So two successive periods, and let's call them days, two successive days of a higher high and a higher low. Therefore, we have a short-term uptrend. Now, the exact opposite of that is a short-term downtrend, where we have two successive periods, for example, days, so two successive days of a lower high and lower lows, and therefore a short-term downtrend. Now, I think it's important that we do wait for that second day. We start with our reference day, I guess day 0 or period 0. We have one down day, but I think it's important just to confirm that with a second to know that we are in a short-term downtrend. Now, once we identify short-term up and short-term downtrends, putting those all together, we can now identify two more terms called peaks and troughs. So what we identify is the highest point between a short-term uptrend and a short-term downtrend. That highest point is known as a peak. Notice here we have two successive days or bars with a higher high and a higher low, and it's important to note that this short-term uptrend will continue to exist until there is absolute evidence that it's changed. So just because we have one down day here, for example, doesn't mean that this short-term uptrend is over. And in fact, we continue on for another couple of bars here where we have continual higher highs and higher lows. When we get to this point here, we've got that one down period, but that's not enough to say the short-term uptrend is over, until, of course, we receive that second period where we've now had two consecutive periods of lower highs and lower lows. Therefore, we are now in a short-term downtrend, and that really commenced on this period here. So the highest point between the short-term uptrend and the short-term downtrend we refer to as a peak. If you turn that upside down, we can now identify the lowest point between a short-term downtrend and a short-term uptrend, and we identify that particular level as a trough. Well, if we join all those together, and we can now take all these highest points, for example there's another peak there, and again we can mark the troughs in. We can now identify all these peaks and troughs and really put together a picture of a medium-term uptrend. Now, if this was a daily chart, you're probably counting around 10, 20, 25 days there, roughly about 4 to 5 weeks of trading activity here, where this particular security would be in a medium-term uptrend because it's achieving higher peaks and higher troughs. And just like the short-term uptrend, you could argue that this trend continues to exist until there is absolute evidence that it's changed, and that absolute evidence would be, perhaps, if I was to alter this chart somehow, if the short-term uptrend only came up to this point here, then we had a short-term downtrend commence. This would be the peak here, and we'd be on our way to forming not only a lower peak, but on our way forming a lower trough, and therefore that higher peaks and higher troughs no longer exists, and therefore the medium-term trend no longer exists. And then we would have an example like this of a medium-term downtrend, where again we can mark in the peaks and the troughs, and we're achieving lower peaks, lower troughs, therefore we're in a medium-term downtrend. As I said, I think the two most effective ways of identifying trends are using moving averages and just simple peaks and troughs analysis. And if you were to separate those two. Whilst this is maybe a little bit more time intensive and a little bit more specific or precise, it's probably the most effective way of identifying trends both in the short term and also the medium term. And I think just a simple understanding of peaks and troughs and short-term uptrends and downtrends can really greatly assist your analysis and ensure that you only enter stocks that are moving in the right direction.